You are here for the webinar titled Transforming Charitable Donations via Impact Evaluation. My name is Jaime Stief. I work with the Tamarack Institute, and it's a pleasure to host you today. I'm going to hand the microphone over to my colleague Chúk, who's going to start us with a land acknowledgement.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. If you haven't been in a place that is evening, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. So my name is Chúk Odenigbo. I'm one of the consulting directors of Impact Evaluation at the Tamarack Institute. I'll be facilitating this discussion. And as Jaime mentioned, we'll start off with a land acknowledgement. I'm just going to sort of throw in a quote into the chat box. Whenever I lead a land acknowledgement, I like to sort of start off with thinking about why we do land acknowledgements in the first place. And so there's this very sort of powerful quote from Devon Solace that says, "You can have the nicest, most beautiful, most respectful land acknowledgement of all time, but if you have no actions to back up your words, then why are you bothering?" And so it makes us think about, why is it that we do this? And we think about the report released by the Truth and Reconciliation Committee as a way to engage meaningfully in reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And one of the recommendations is doing a land acknowledgement. However, it is seen as a beginning point, a starting point in rewriting history so that people know whose land they're on, as well as people are able to place themselves within that history as a means of engaging in meaningful reconciliation action towards the original guardians of the land and towards the land herself. And so with that in mind, I formulated my land acknowledgement for the town of Falher in Alberta to recognize the territory upon which I find myself. But once again, remember that the land acknowledgement is a way of understanding the history of the land that we are on, our connection to it, and therefore our responsibility to it. And so I'm going to encourage each of you to personalize this land acknowledgement for the lands that you find yourself on. The indigenous peoples of the Casta, Cree, and Sakani nations had inhabited the Peace River region since time immemorial. On June 20th, 1899, local indigenous populations and a representative of the Government of Canada, Commissioner David Laird, signed Treaty Number 8 at Little Slave Lake. Due to many settlers moving south, Bishop Émile Jean-Baptiste Marie Giroux had tasked Father Jean-Baptiste Giroux of Montréal and Father Constant Falher with attracting French-Canadian Catholics to the Peace River. The federal government surveyed the Peace River region in the early 1900s, and the area was open to colonization in 1912. Fathers Giroux and Falher on horseback led settlers in horse-drawn wagons. An indigenous guide named Payu led them but abandoned them near Winagami. However, the colonizers found their guide when Father Giroux took them to visit a Cree village. They then followed an indigenous trail and arrived near Peavine Creek, where they rested and ate. The next morning, Sunday, June 2nd, before setting out again, Father Falher spoke. "My friends," he said, "we do not yet know to whom in the future these lands will belong. Does it not seem fitting, at least, to mark the passage of French-Canadian Catholics in this place by planting a cross on which the names of all of you would be engraved?" A unanimous yes greeted this proposal. Thus, Falher began, with the names of the original settlers forever engraved in history. However, in recording this history, the names of the traditional caretakers of these territories were chosen to not be retained. As a current resident of Falher, a town named after a Catholic Francophone father who was used by the English as a tool of colonization of these lands to render them white, I humbly pay tribute to the Cree, the Daneza, the Denisontigny peoples, whose stories have been forever changed by the legacy of colonization, white supremacy, and the pitting of marginalized groups against one another. The town of Falher was built in Treaty Number 8 territory, thus recognizing the sovereignty of these peoples and our obligation to share the land and its resources with them. As someone who lives here, I am signatory to this treaty of peace and friendship. It is imperative that we follow the guidance of these traditional caretakers, the systems of knowledge, learning, and culture that emphasize the well-being of the earth. Falher is also in Region 6 of the Alberta Métis Nation. I pay homage to the Métis people. Like the First Nations, the Métis people have demanded and still demand justice, sovereignty, and the right to live with dignity and respect by following their knowledge and cultural systems. As a Black Francophone, I have an obligation to support them, given that our histories and our destinies are so closely intertwined. I pay tribute to all Indigenous peoples living in the region, whether they be from here or elsewhere, young or old, as they too continue to advocate for climate justice and the right to live with dignity and respect by following their knowledge and cultural systems. It is important to recognize the strength and resilience of these First Peoples and support them whenever we can. Jaime, next slide, please. I would also like to take this moment to acknowledge the history of slavery and indentured servitude in Canada, to honor all the Black and non-Black peoples whose blood went into building this nation. Even though they did so much for this country, their stories are so often left untold. I'd like to give you all a moment to personalize this land acknowledgement to you. And so let's stay on mute for about 1 minute to allow you time to reflect. Thank you all for joining me in that. Let's get this party started. We're going to start off with giving y'all a quick intro to our spectacular speakers. So they'll be sort of giving their name so that we know how to pronounce the name. They'll be mentioning which organization that they are representing or that they are with, and they'll be mentioning where they are calling in from. So shall we start with you, Bruce?
Sure. Thanks very much, Chúk. Hi, everyone. Delighted to be here today. My name is Bruce MacDonald. I'm the CEO at Imagine Canada, coming to you from beautiful Hamilton, Ontario today. Looking forward to the discussion.
Amazing. Chantelle?
Thank you, Chúk. Thank you, Bruce. Hello, everyone. I'm Chantelle More. I'm the Manager of Social Impact from Gore Mutual Foundation, and I'm calling in from our offices in Cambridge today.
Lovely. And Aniska?
Hi, folks. I'm Aniska Ali. I use she, her pronoun. I'm calling in from Treaty 13, Toronto, also known as Toronto, and I am the Director of Philanthropy at the 519.
Spectacular. Okay. So if y'all want to know more about our speakers, their bios are on the webinar event page, which has been linked in the chat box. So without further ado, let's kind of dive in. Chantelle, this entire sort of conversation, this entire panel started with an exchange between Tamarack and Gore Mutual. And so I was wondering if you'd give us a little bit of the background as to why we're even having this conversation in the first place.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you, Chúk. So I've been with Gore Mutual for 2.5 years, and I was brought on board to help develop their social impact strategy, and have come to Gore Mutual with 12 years experience as a fund developer, primarily within corporate philanthropy for international, national, and regional charitable organizations. And we had our 25th anniversary last year, which was a big opportunity to celebrate, but also to reflect. And with that reflection came a time where the charitable sector was seeing record staff burnout rates, donation rates dropping, and really an opportunity for us to make some systematic changes. And our foundation was concerned and did some research, which led us to Imagine Canada's State of Evaluation report, really highlighting some alarming statistics and opportunities for us to all make some potential changes. And so we researched with our own strategic charitable partners, surveying them, gaining their insights, and then launched a monitoring and evaluation pilot, which enables our charitable partners to choose their own metrics of success, as well as providing monitoring and evaluation capacity building grants when we require the monitoring and evaluation of our foundation support. And so we put together a thought leadership piece and released that earlier this year. And we're here to talk a little bit more about our lived experiences, those reports, and joining us today is Aniska, who represents the 519, who is a beneficiary of our support.
Spectacular. Thank you so much for that background. As someone who sort of works in impact evaluation, it's such an interesting field because there's many ways to sort of try and acknowledge impact. There's a lot of ways to try and evaluate the work that we're doing, both prior to beginning the work and during the work, after the work. And so given sort of your experience as somebody who has been on quote unquote both ends, right? You've been on the receiving end where you've sort of sought out philanthropy, you've sought out dollars, and then you've also been on the giving end in your role with Gore Mutual. Can you share in hindsight what would benefit those joining us today who may be exclusively focused in one or more of those roles, but not necessarily having the experience of both?
Yes, thank you, Chúk. I could spend a whole hour talking about what in hindsight I wish I knew then that I know now. But specifically really focusing on what we're here to talk about in this conversation, I think it really boils down to, it's not what we give, it's how we give, right? And for funders on the call, that is really about how we give support and explicit support for the requirements of our charitable partners to monitor and evaluate the impact of our giving. We can give six-figure grants, but if there's a lot of ties attached to that gift, and what we've learned, and we'll get into those statistics a little later on, that the resources available and the skills inside the charitable sector right now around monitoring and evaluation, is it really a six-figure gift, or is there too many strings attached to it? So really to think about how we are giving that support, how we are giving transparency for our evaluating requirements when engaging with the charitable partner. So really around that. And then for fundraisers, I would say it is around how you give direction. We understand as corporate funders, and I hope that fundraisers know this, we know that you're the experts. We know that the charitable sector are the experts, but we also rely on your direction. And when we know better, we do better. So I say that as someone who was a fundraiser, and I know the statistics of it taking 10% more time to acquire a new donor than it is to retain and cultivate a current donor. And so our own, or the charitable sector itself, really tells their fundraisers these statistics, which then lead fundraisers to do whatever it takes to retain and cultivate corporate funding. And so if corporate funders knew that when providing prescribed metrics that you need to evaluate, if they knew what was happening internally, to have to set up systems that are not in place for that, for the strain that that causes on program staff, and for how that takes you away from your mission-driven priorities, I don't think that they would, when they know better, they'll do better. So I do think it is incumbent upon us to give direction to charitable partners, because all of us want to support and all of us want true partnership. And then for funders, my last point on that would be that we want to ensure the success of the individuals inside the charitable sector that are doing the work. And for us, really providing that capacity building support is strategic. And so considering how we give support for that direct community impact, let's start thinking about how we can also support the people doing the work and aligning our funding strategies accordingly.
Amazing. Can I just say how impressive it is, how succinct you were, but giving such clear points to share with folk. You kind of mentioned data and data points. And so I'm going to turn to Bruce now to kind of chat about, the data that we're seeing in the field. What are some of the shifts we're seeing to support organizations with funding for evaluation? And why is this important? What are the numbers showing? What are the trends you're seeing in your role demonstrating?
Yeah, thanks very much. And I just want to pick up on some of the things that Chantelle just spoke to, and maybe it's sort of a kind of a yes and add another one in. As I think about the importance of this conversation, I think one of the things that is critically important as we think about impact and evaluation is learning. For organizations, many of whom are new, many of whom have been around a long time, they kind of test and try. Run programs and understand, are they making a difference in the communities? Are they contributing to the missions that they're set up to serve? Unless we ask questions and evaluate, we actually don't know the answer to that. And we're living in a nation and a society that's rapidly changing. And I think it just heightens the importance of this conversation. And so it wouldn't be an Imagine Canada participation if there wasn't some data points. So Jaime, if I could just ask you to share the screen on the first one. And I think hopefully the contribution we'll make here on this call today is to talk about the context of the environment in which we're working right now. And it's interesting, as we saw from the start of the pandemic, a straight line trajectory going up in terms of demand for services, that Canadians were coming to charities and nonprofits looking for more services. And what we've seen has been a bit counterintuitive. We thought once the crisis of the pandemic had hit a zenith, it might come down a bit. Then we headed into a period of prolonged inflation. Now we're in a period of high core prices for families. And so this is actually from a survey that we did in March and comparing to 2021. And you can see that really not that much has changed as it relates to sustained high demand. 3 in 4 Organizations are seeing demand for charitable services increasing, and we have different sort of cuts to the data, and in particular, older Canadians and lower income groups are saying they need services. And this has not barely changed. We thought it would come down a bit, but it's not. So as we think about impact of organizations, they are still operating in an environment where they're being asked, the treadmill's still at a pretty high speed, if I could say, because they're being asked to serve their communities. If we can go to the next slide. At the same time, it's so interesting to see what a high percentage of Canadians value these services. The vast majority of all Canadians, 81%, believe that the services delivered by charities and nonprofits are essential to the well-being of the country and its citizens. This is a ringing endorsement of the centrality of the sector in Canada. We are in almost every community in this country providing services, sometimes by paid staff, sometimes by volunteers, but are here when Canadians need them. And I think these are important contextual points as we go forward. If we can go to the next slide. And at the same time, this comes back to the state of evaluation report that Chantelle mentioned. When we look at organizations and their ability to learn, in their ability to tell a story, in their ability to present data, just 20% of externally funded charities, which is almost everybody, reported receiving dedicated evaluation funding. And that those who did tend to evaluate more involved aspects of their work, such as impact and return on investment, and to use more specialized evaluation methods. So as we think about this environment, it's critically important to Canadians. More and more people are coming to us than ever before, and it's not abating in any way. And yet, we still struggle with the basics to tell our story, both from a narrative perspective and from a data perspective. But I think there's some hope. Let's go to the next slide. It's interesting. We, in this recent poll that we did of Canadians, we presented them with cost centers and asked them questions around what do they think about when they give to organizations? What are those important costs that organizations may or may not, in their minds, be reasonable for organizations to invest money in? And it's interesting that as we looked at those factors that people were thinking about when they were supporting organizations, alignment to goals and effective operations topped the list of factors. And I want to show you a little bit more of the detail on this on the next slide. The number one item that came in at 83%, the organization has a strong reputation for delivering its promises. At number 5, the organization provides detailed information about its impact at 76%. At number 6, you believe the organization can achieve its stated objectives at 74%. 3 of the top 6 items that Canadians said they were thinking about when supporting organizations relate to impact and mission. We have to be able to tell that story well. I threw the last 2 on for interest because in a nation and society that has had, I would say, an over-indexing of importance around a cost-dominant narrative, it's not till number 7 and number 9 that administrative costs even surface. And so as we think about a place going forward, driving to impact and being able to tell that story, there's a receptiveness out there. Now, the question is, can we reframe the system to allow us to do that? So just to summarize and pass it back to Chúk, I think what's so interesting right now is there may be a moment in time that we're seeing where Canadians, where this convergence of factors comes together. People are turning to the sector for services. They believe those services to be essential. And there's an interest around the mission and the impact of those organizations as the most important considerations around which organizations they're going to support. How now can we as a sector kind of lean into that a little bit and suppress that cost-dominant narrative and create a new conversation with Canadians that's centered around the difference they make in their communities?
Amazing. Before we sort of move on, Chantelle, I want to give you a chance to sort of react to some of the statistics Bruce shared and some of these interesting pieces that have come out from that national survey around what is important to Canadians when they support charities.
Well, I wrote down quickly, Bruce, when you said reframing the system. And I think for me, And what's important for Canadians is we're going through a real transformation as a country, and I would say the world as a whole. And the charitable sector, we all know, plays a critical role in each of our communities, but it also plays a critical role in our economy. And if I'm not mistaken, Bruce, the Canadian charitable sector is the 8th grossing largest GDP factor for Canada's economy. Am I right?
Just over 8%, absolutely.
Over 8%. So it is important to our neighbors. It is important to our communities. It is important to our economic stability as Canada. And if we need to reframe the system, I think I speak in my lived experience. I think fundraisers themselves and charitable organizations and corporate funders having a large workforce have an opportunity to do this together. And so one of the driving factors that I had for piloting this program is that corporate funding and funding as a whole has the impact immediately to provide charitable organizations to do what they do best. But imagine if corporate funding, or let's say funding as a whole, was there to help fundraisers and the strategy of that charity to drive your own mission. To say, here, our $600,000, it's not our predetermined metrics. We want you to use this to help drive your mission priorities and use our funding to help drive those priorities forward, which might influence policy, which might influence a whole other world of opportunity. And so reframing systems is how can funding accelerate what charities' perspectives and charities' strategies are, instead of it being around predetermined metrics that might not be that charity's mission focus. So around the admin cost, I really had one quick point on that. I had some very interesting conversations with different types of groups and individuals after this thought leadership piece came out. And one question was raised around, well, we provide opportunity for admin support to be provided. And clearly, working in the charitable sector, that admin cost, let's say you give 100,000 and 30,000 of it can go towards admin, that gets eaten up really quick, right? Very quickly. And that's salaries, that's roof, that's hydro, that is those core costs to run that community impact program. I have yet to meet a charity, I have yet to work for a charity that will take that admin cost and put it towards their own core learning, because the needs are so great. Charitable organizations and those serving those organizations are on the front line seeing what growing service demands are. We can see that in newspaper, we can see that in press releases. These individuals like Aniska are seeing it on the daily, on the front lines, and they will not choose to take that money from admin cost and put it towards monitoring and evaluation capacity building internally when there are people being turned away at a door because they can't keep providing support. So admin cost should not be considered as an opportunity around explicit support for charitable organizations when requiring them to go over and above and do monitoring and evaluation work. That should be a separate grant that is given explicitly for that support. So those are kind of two ringing bells for me, Bruce, on your comments.
Wow, amazing. I want to encourage folk in the chat box to also react to the stats that Bruce shared, some of the comments that Chantelle has shared as well. We want to hear your thoughts. Aniska, I'm going to turn it to you now. First, can I ask you to sort of react to the stats that Bruce shared? What are some of your thoughts as well regarding what Canadians value in the charity sector, your thoughts around impact evaluation, admin costs, all that fun stuff?
Sure. So those stats predominantly were validating to what I see every day. Folks, whether as service users themselves, communities of supporters, or our neighbors, understand by and large that the charitable services that are being offered by a range of organizations help make communities brighter for everyone. I like to think of this as the work that organizations in the social impact space do is to create communities where we all thrive, right? And seeing the fact that Canadians by and large understand that it's not this binary of who needs and who has. It's about where do we all want to live? How do we all take care of each other? And obviously that work together requires collective action. So whether that's by the work of supporters that are helping to fuel that mission, folks who are doing the work in organizations, and community members themselves who are accessing services. We're all part of that larger ecosystem of taking care of each other and building more vibrant, healthier and stronger communities. So it's great to see that belief shared by some across the country. In acknowledgement of administrative cause, I'm overhead. Like that's what it comes down to. Myself, my colleagues, many of us are understood to be somehow distinct from the work that's happening that directly is frontline service to community members. I've always really struggled with that because I've yet to see a charitable organization where anyone has discrete roles. Everyone, in the majority of organizations I work with, everyone, we like to call everyone stacks of chairs, right? Like we're all in it together, regardless of the job function. We're all building that strength and vitality of the organization, and in turn, the services we're able to offer. So it is difficult for me to understand this dichotomy where the folks who are paying the bills, cleaning the space, raising the funds, working with volunteers, ensuring the financial health of the organization, ensuring the standards of community care are being upheld, and evaluation impact are being tracked and actually concretely being used within work planning and project design. To see that as overhead is difficult for me. It's difficult to tease those pieces out. So I'm glad to see that the majority of folks understand that all of this, whether you see it or not, there's a huge amount of work happening behind the scenes, and that work requires fuel. So I've been in the charitable space for 20 years now, 15 of that acting as a fundraiser, and I can validate the fact that costs associated to evaluation and impact reporting and synthesis of that data and all the tools it requires to be able to do that properly, it's not high on the needs of where people want to put their money. It's seen as periphery. However, we are asked to demonstrate that impact when we go to find the funding to keep the work, right? And not only is it essential, I think it's a good thing that funders, donors, community supporters are asking not just who you are, but what do you do? How are you meaningfully engaging in this issue? I think it's incredibly important. Those questions deserve answers. The wealth of information within impact evaluation is not just for the funder. That wealth of information transforms the work. I said this yesterday, actually. The people that I work with is the most innovative I know. They are quick to respond, to see the trend, to respond to the trend, to pivot, to be able to meaningfully address. And then they watch for whether or not the intervention is having the intended result. They're doing most of it anecdotally because there is no time. There's no moment to step back. Many of these spaces are not staffed in a way where it's somebody's job to go and do that work. It's everybody's job, and we're doing it constantly. It's not working on a 6-month cycle or a 12-month cycle or a 3-year strategic planning cycle. It's happening in the moment because communities demand that level of insightful movement. So when funders like Gore step up to the plate and understand that that work is essential, not only for them to feel good about the investment they are making and feel strong in the communities that they're helping to support, but also to make sure that those organizations are staying responsive to the needs of communities. That's where the wealth is there. None of us who work in these organizations want to keep doing things that are broken. We don't want to keep doing work that's not having the envisioned impact. We're deeply connected to our communities being well served. That information allows us to do that. And funding allows that information to be gathered in a way that doesn't feel like it's off the side of someone's desk, or is dictated to us by a funder, and requires metrics that we know don't reflect the wealth of the work. There is so much insight within the charitable space that my colleagues hold and across the sector of what works and what doesn't, how to improve, and how to do that in a timely way. Having a chance to dedicate time and effort to that creates stronger results. This isn't about, fancy graphs and impact reports. This is about how do we do this better? How do we respond better? This is an essential way of showing community care.
Amazing, thank you. I think definitely sort of in hearing your words, but then also that passion behind it, which is always just like a nice, like what's the saying in English? Icing on the carrot cake, yes. But I also sort of want to in recognizing that a lot of the people who are going to be on this call are not funders, but they're fundees, right? They're people who receive funding, who go and seek out funding. I'm curious as to your experience, Aniska, is there a way, again, recognizing that power imbalance, that fundees can influence funders to shift their thinking to provide that additional support for them to be able to capture the impact? Because as you kind of mentioned, impact evaluation is not just for funders. When you engage in strategic learning, where you're effectively learning and incorporating what it is that you've learned from the impact that your organization has had through whatever project you're looking at, and you're able to improve it either within the project itself, or within the org, or within the way you operate, or within the way you have an impact in the mission and the values that your organization holds. It's necessary. It's important work. And so I guess coming back to you, Aniska, for organizations that aren't getting funding from like Gore Mutual, so the funders don't necessarily have, as a funding model that recognizes and names impact evaluation, are there ways that fundees can initiate conversations with the funder?
I'm glad that you called out the power imbalance, because this is scary stuff to go and talk back to your funders, right? It is difficult and we have been trained as fundraisers to, as my kids' teachers say, you get what you get, you don't get upset. Like, this is the idea is that we're supposed to be grateful beneficiaries as opposed to partners in a shared mission. And so my advice, what I've seen is powerful in my own practice, is to walk into those rooms knowing that you are partners at the table. The work that you're doing in communities, organizations is vital, and you have something to offer, as opposed to feeling that you must be endlessly grateful and hope only share the positive data with funders. To go into a space and say, listen, we're here for the same reason. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I think could happen. This is what we want to test. Join me in that way. And it's not going to be a yes with everything. It's not. And I think it's really important that people that this is still operating in an environment where folks are, while communities are appreciative of the services that community organizations offer, there's a lot of opaqueness around what actually happens in an organization. Every time we see some news article hit around overhead costs and who's making what at charitable institution, there's this moment of, sound and fury where folks demonstrate the fact that they're not quite sure how these organizations work and what things cost. I think it's important to not take the first no as always no, and to start building trusting relationships with your funders that are done from a place of mutual benefit, right? Being open, having a clear case, understanding why and what evaluation will do, and being able to share that with the funders is part of the learning journey. It's how we make each other better. And also being very clear about what it actually costs, I think is important. I think as a fundraiser and as organizations, we shy away from showing the true cost, and we don't want to be seen as asking for too much. Letting folks know what it costs and asking how they can contribute is not, it's a meaningful way that you operate in relationship to folks, as opposed to in this top-down system that at the end of the day doesn't benefit.
That is spectacular, right? It makes me sort of think about, that piece around, it's not just a question of walking to a room with that confidence, knowing that you're a partner, but it's also a question of being able to name the value that you're bringing to the table. A lot of excellence in the charity sector is through, as you kind of mentioned, through the human resources, where people are pulling miracles with very little money, very little funding, a lot of work on their plate, and you won't be able to name, here's why I'm a rock star. And if you're minimizing your presence, you're not able to fully articulate a name despite these barriers, despite these, what's it called in English? The horse tricks, the things that horses jump over when they're doing their tricks. Despite all of these, here we are getting hurdles. Thank you, Jaime. Despite all these hurdles, we're still getting to what we need to get to, and we're still doing what we need to do. Support us. I love that. Chantelle, I noticed you raised your hand.
Yes, I just wanted one really tangible example that I've used to help talking about the value of supporting impact measurement that we require from charitable partners. There's a tangible example that I feel has gotten a lot of results, and that is that back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, funders would expect charitable partners to provide meaningful volunteer experiences, and that was just a part of what happened. And there has been a progress that has been made to understand that there is value from charitable organizations providing meaningful volunteer opportunities, specifically for companies, where it is helping with employee satisfaction, retention, culture building. You can name tangible examples of this. And no longer do most of us, and especially here at Gore Mutual, we don't. But we do not expect charitable organizations to provide meaningful experiences and volunteer experiences for our employees without providing compensation for that support over and above the support we provide separately. We would never ask a charitable organization to provide a volunteer experience without compensating them for their time and resources to do so. What's the difference with asking a charitable organization to monitor the impact of your philanthropy without providing compensation for that additional time and resources to do so? So that kind of puts a light bulb for certain, mindsets of what that value at the table is, and potentially for fundraisers on the call today, that is kind of a conversation starter for those partners that you have that would not ask you to put a volunteer experience on without compensation. You can say, well, it's kind of the same thing.
No, spectacular. And what's really great about your response is it transitions nicely into a question we actually have in the Q&A. So from Carolyn Burns, we have, they would love to know how the other key decision makers and board have reacted to this change in giving strategy at Gore Mutual.
So when we brought forward the results that both from the state of evaluation as well as our survey results from strategic charitable partners, our board unanimously reviewed all that research and unanimously agreed that this feels right for Gore Mutual, and that we would no longer require monitoring and evaluation and reporting expectations of charitable beneficiaries unless we compensate with a charitable capacity building grant for the efforts to do so. If we provide grants to charitable organizations and do not provide a capacity building grant, we will not ask that charity to provide any monitoring and evaluation. So our board has grabbed a hold of this and has put their full support behind it, and really challenged us here on the purpose team to think for ourselves and not follow the status quo of requiring indirect lives touch numbers coming quarterly or semi-annually. So I really do appreciate the support and the full advocacy to remove any barriers for our purpose team to pilot this approach, and I do hope that others will follow suit.
Amazing. Let me transition into a impact evaluation question that I feel like a lot of organizations may have, especially organizations who work in environmental and social and community sectors where the impact is not always obvious, right? So for organizations who are seeking out funding for running, a workshop series on increased increase civic engagement, or who are seeking to put out a publication or technical note on the gender impacts of climate change. Since the impact is not necessarily obvious, right? It's, we can say like 10,000 people downloaded this article, but we don't know what the impact that has had is. I would like to hear from everyone at the table, and we'll start with Bruce. What are your thoughts on how organizations, both fundees and funders, can better capture the secondary and tertiary impacts of the work that they do, right? That goes beyond, well, we had 10 registrants at this workshop, cool. But like, how does that impact your overall goal of getting more people to be voting? How does that impact your overall goal of getting more women in politics? How does that impact your overall goal of helping communities become more climate resilient? How are we able to better capture those impacts and name those impacts? Because I think, kind of as Aniska was mentioning earlier, it's important for charitable organizations to be able to name their impacts, because then it allows them to be able to A, improve via strategic learning, but then B, also, like, it gives empowerment to know that, hey, we're making a difference. And then of course it helps the funders on their end, because they're like, cool, our money is making a difference. Bruce.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's interesting because it made me think of the work of my last job with Big Brothers Big Sisters. We were a preventative long-term organization. To go into a funder and suggest that in the first month of a mentoring match between a big sister and a little sister, that child's life was transformed, or the mentor, that was just disingenuous. And I think part of that conversation is being authentic about the programs themselves, the difference that you seek to make, and how can the funder be a partner in a longer term solution? Because so many of the long-term preventative programs, they require good data over a long period of time. That resonates for many funders. They get it because they are business people and they look to data on sales and marketing and all those kinds of things. So for us, the invitation was to say, how can the funder be a partner in ensuring that we're getting good data in with which to do longer term evaluations, so that we can come back to them with both the stories, the human stories, and the quantitative difference that the programs are making in the lives of, in that case, young people. And I might offer two other quick little thoughts in here. One is, I think as it relates to data, there's an opportunity in today's world to pull on another thread, and that's cybersecurity and data privacy. And so as organizations are seeking to have better data, to understand it with greater levels of sophistication, impact and employee evaluation tools that use data, we're living in a world where there is increasing pressure on organizations to ensure that that data is safe. And I think this is another opportunity to engage with funders who get this every day, to be partners in ensuring that both the system is in place and that it's protected. And this is another way to link those. And the final point that I'll make is, I think to a certain degree, there's again a wonderful opportunity as we think about the sort of longer term secondary, tertiary data to link to corporate self-interest. I mean, it sounds awful, but to a certain degree, what we've seen over the last 30 years is companies in particular, and also foundations, who are getting more sophisticated in articulating their interests in supporting the community. They can't do that unless we can show them how their investment is making a difference. There is a self-interest to work with us to say, if your interest is in graduation rates, and you're funding them when they're in grade 6, you don't know what their high school graduation rate is for another 6 years or 7 years or whatever it might be. How are you going to be players with us to ensure that your story at a corporate level can be told, because we've worked together to make sure we've been understanding their journey through the education system?
Those are some excellent points, and I'm really glad you brought up the data piece, right? I think it's really important that we think about data justice, digital justice as well. So sort of, throwing on an anti-racism / DEI lens to it as well, recognizing that data has oftentimes been used as a tool of harm by organizations, by corporations, by charities themselves as well. And so as if folk who are listening to this call are like jumping onto jumping onto this and trying to figure out how do we collect more data, how do we evaluate our impact through data collection, sort of recognizing that there may be pushback from communities who have been harmed via data collection means, and looking to make sure that we're integrating ways in which we can protect that data and protect the people whose data that we are collecting, because data is ultimately precious, right? Organizations are always going to pay a premium for data. So recognizing the value of not just engaging community, but the value that comes with their data and the trust that comes with that data as well. Aniska, I'll pass it to you for some of your thoughts on that secondary tertiary impact, that longer term evaluation, and helping organizations build capacity for that, both on the fundee and funder side.
It's a really multi-level question, right? I'm a okay. So charitable organizations have big visions, right? They're going to change the world. They're going to enrich our next generation of leaders. They're going to end hunger. They're going to end homelessness. Oh, cool. But that is a long-term piece that requires multiple partners. It's not going to be done by one organization. And I think being very clear on what you can accomplish as an organization, being very clear on where your sphere of influence is, what your intervention will meaningfully do, and standing in that truth is really important as opposed to looking for the biggest buzzword. I think for too long, we have looked for the big aspirational goals and then tried to gather the stories and the photos and the pieces that speak to, we're doing it. Look at us doing it. We're going to do it piece by piece. We're going to do it in some ways and not other ways. I think all of the work is meaningful. I think when we're held accountable to ending poverty in a 12-month funding cycle, that is, it's just not you can't do it. And you can't do it alone. We operate in a larger system. So for impact and evaluation to work, we need to understand what is truly actionable in the short term and the long term. And to Bruce's point, we need folks who are going to stick with us throughout that time if they're looking for long-term results, which is an investment folks are making with a level of trust that doesn't always go right the first 6 months. When you're trying something new, you may need longer. And we have to be okay with the fact that change is incremental. So when I go to my program colleagues and we talk about evaluation, they're constantly like, well, I don't know if I have the story. I'm like, like, take the pressure off yourself for a second. Tell me what made you feel good about the work that you did today, tomorrow. What's giving you hope? Where do you see possibility? Where do you think you've meaningfully engaged? And don't shy away from sharing that with your partners as valuable, as opposed to searching for that big, bright, blockbuster moment, which happens, but all too often seems the only moments. Those are the only moments that matter. There's so much that we're doing that is intangible, that isn't going to be collected or reflected. The pure power of that. And I think we need to accept a broader range of what impact can look like and be more truthful. To your piece around the danger in data and communities that have been hurt in data, I am very cautious in employing evaluation tools in communities that have been over-surveyed. They have been asked over and over again, who are you? What happened to you? What do you want? How did this one intervention change your world, right? Like, tell us the thing that I can put in the funder report. I don't want to do that to people. I don't want to make them, I call it bleeding on demand. I don't want that from community members. We're in this together. How do we tell and capture data in a way that is transparent, that is safe, and that acknowledges when we're asking self-serving questions. We're not asking the questions that will actually move the mission forward. We're asking the questions that will make us as organizations feel good about what we're doing and our funders feel good about what they're funding. If we understand data and information to be a way that we improve and we move forward together, far more powerful, and it can be more respectfully done, because it all opens up opportunities for folks to push back and say, why are you asking me this? I don't want to share this. This is not something that I feel comfortable with. And I think that is incredibly important, because we have to trouble this idea of beneficiaries who pay us through crying for. We have to completely disrupt that and ask them more meaningful questions around what are we actually doing to meaningfully impact people's lives.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, absolutely. Something that you said made me think about this quote by Annemie Paul, where she said, "It's not a marathon, it's a relay race." And I've reached the point where I've reached, and I'm now ready to pass the baton to the next person. And so taking a very communal approach, recognizing that we are, as charitable organizations, we're in community with one another. This whole, the whole competition with one another thing, that doesn't work in the charitable sector, because if Bob's charity dies, that's cool, but now my charity has twice the work to do to achieve that same change that we could collaborate to achieve together. I'm going to pass it to you, Chantelle, for our last word. Thoughts on what Bruce and Aniska have shared, or just thoughts in general about that long-term evaluation piece, or like evaluating secondary and tertiary impacts from the work that organizations are trying to do?
I think, Aniska and Bruce covered it. One piece that I would say, just from a funder's lens, is that storytelling through data is quite key. And if you are looking for funders to understand, be able to tell the story between what qualitative and quantitative data you are hoping to collect, how it is going to help you achieve your priority missions, and do so in a storytelling narrative. We understand things take time, as Bruce said. That's how the business world runs. But to get us engaged and get us to understand, please do come with that story and the compelling nature between what qualitative and quantitative data points are. And if there are dangers in creating more systematic racism or issues related to that, that should be shared with us and explicitly let us know. And there would be no corporate partner that would push back on it. We do not want to do any further.
I love that. And so with that, we've got about 5 minutes left, which I'm going to pass it off to Jaime to initiate us in closing. I'm going to take a moment to do a self-plug. If your organization doesn't have a lot of capacity for impact evaluation, you want to learn, you want to grow in it, Tamarack is offering a 101 impact evaluation session led by me in September. And so feel free to keep the website for that. And then just before I pass it off to Jaime, I want to give a massive thank you to Chantelle for initiating this conversation with us and allowing us to come together in this moment, for Bruce for joining us, for Aniska for joining us and sharing your stories, your statistics, your wisdom, your knowledge. It has been incredibly important, incredibly valuable. And I just love that we've had a conversation around impact evaluation and money, because I think we don't have this conversation ever. And so this is really awesome. And it's also cool to just share like little innovations and little things that make a difference. I say little, but realistically speaking, this is making a meaningful impact on charities, on organizations, and then in turn on communities as well. So thank you all for your time, your energy, and thank you for being here. Jaime, off to you.
I am muted. Thank you very much. So I'm just really quickly sharing that workshop page in the chat. The date of it, I believe, is September 26th. I am going to very, very quickly share some wrap-up slide. Just one moment here. Okay, so what I wanted to share was just a plug for our event in October called Engage Fest. What it's going to be is an opportunity to join for collaborative learning across the various topic areas that Tamarack does work in collaboration on, because we do work with poverty and climate and building belonging and collective impact. We're finding that as so many people are navigating a polycrisis, we wanted to remove some of the silos between the learning that happens and the networking that happens at our member events. So we'd love to see you there, and you'll learn more about it in our follow-up email. And yeah, it's been such a pleasure to have you all here today. We'll be sending out the recording in the next few days, and as well as links to all of the resources that were shared in the chat. So thanks again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.